Facing challenges and overcoming setbacks is part of doing business. Whether you have the expertise to survive them or not could mean the difference between success or failure. Welcome to We Are Women, featuring revealing conversations that provide invaluable insights into the success secrets of female masterminds. A must listen for every entrepreneurial woman. Now here's your host, Janine Vosper.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of the We Are Women podcast. I am Janine Vosper, your host, and with me today I have Janie Jordan. Now, Janie is a former journalist and award-winning PR consultant. She is best known for her work in reputation risk with highly acclaimed book on crisis management, The 4 Highly Effective Stages of Crisis Management. And she's got 20 years experience in advising, coaching, and training senior executive teams on leadership in a crisis. Gosh, 2020 and 21, I think you'd certainly be busy, Janie. She is a dedicated and passionate educator in our profession of teaching at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels, both here in Australia and in North America, including the University of Sydney, the University of New South Wales, Penn State, UC Berkeley, plus various customized professional development programs. Her work is now dedicated to powerful leadership communication, particularly when the stakes are high and reputations and lives are on the line. Janie founded and ran 2 very successful communication firms, and she consults from her home in the Upper Hunter Valley in New South Wales. Welcome, Janie.
Thank you, Janine. And yes, what a year for reputational risk, 2021. And we're only into the early part of the year. And of course, we started off with those horrible riots in the capital in America. But of course, I think we now have a peaceful transition, which is good. And bushfires, floods, and rampaging coronavirus. So welcome to 2021.
I know the whole 2020s, I think maybe the whole decade we can eventually eliminate. Hopefully things have changed before we get through the next 10 years, but we don't know, do we? And this is part of what crisis management is about. You don't know.
No, it is really interesting that people, you don't know what you don't know. Absolutely. But in my profession, what I find that a lot of people are scared. They actually are really scared by the word crisis. It seems to, if you like, stop them and freeze them. And a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, and we could be talking up to $20, $50 million businesses here, have actually no plan, haven't even sat down to think about what could go wrong, what would put our business at risk. And I've found, Janine, that it's actually quite a fun thing to do. In the sense you get a team together, take a sort of horizontal cross section of your organization. So you're representing all parts of it. And let me tell you, teams have a great deal of fun thinking of all the possibly bad things that could go wrong in an organization.
And I don't think, unless people are into, a lot of science fiction movies, I don't think anyone would have sat down at the beginning of 2020 and said a virus will take over the world.
Yeah, well, do you know what? There were. And that's the thing. Even our federal government here in Australia had done a plan, literally had done a crisis scenario that people like me facilitate. And it was exactly like what happened.
Goodness.
Yes. So, there is some level of preparation. And of course, it's always when a crisis hits, there's always the proverbial, I told you so. You hear the pundits and the experts, it's what my book is about, looking at the stages of how the media report a crisis. It's so damn predictable. So that's the good news here for the fabulous female leaders out there, that it isn't something to be scared of. It is actually something that you can, with a bit of guidance, with a few simple rules and principles, you can actually protect your very precious reputation, whether that be your own personal brand or whether that's a hard fought brand for a lot of we women, or whether it's your organization and you have brands and products out there. Because today it's just really a matter of when something will hit and put your reputation at risk as opposed to if. So it's really something to actually, I think about this way, Janine. It's about, if you have a crisis-ready organisation, which is an adaptable, flexible, agile organisation, you have a pretty invincible brand.
And that it doesn't take much, does it? It just can, something simple can happen, and particularly when it's a personal brand. When we can look at a lot of our athletes, and I think they're probably the best example of where their brand can, because they've fallen from grace, and then the brand is just lost. I mean, Tiger Woods, that's probably one of the best examples of when he got into trouble and, he's playing around, he lost all his sponsors and his whole brand, and he had to build that up again.
Absolutely. It's a very good example, actually. And that's what you could think about is, I always say, let's plan for the best. Plan for the worst and hope for the best, in the sense, I always say, this is my advice, think like a sociopath. And it's right, because it's little things, Janine, that bring you undone. I mean, I've worked with organisations plan for the big things. And indeed, if we go back to the tragic 9/11, the US had planned for a plane crashing into those incredibly tall buildings. But they didn't plan for it to be a terrorist attack the way it was and 2 of the buildings to go down. So you plan for the big things, but that's a huge example, of course, but it's the little things that bring us undone. So the more bizarre, the more likelihood that it's that little tiny thing will bring you undone. You get caught out, somebody, it just takes a triggering event. If you think of the Me Too movement. What's going to trigger? It just takes one person to stand up and speak out, and suddenly, you're in the spotlight, and everybody wants to criticize you. And what happens in a crisis is that the skeletons come out of the woodwork.
Yes, yeah, and plus it polarizes people often, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So if there are any skeletons in the cupboard, people like me need to know about them, because we don't always want to shed the cupboard bare, then there's nothing to build from. So you want to make sure that you manage, but when you're doing your planning, you've got to think about, well, who else knows this, and in a crisis, who else needs to know this, and how do we actually put this into context for people to give them a way of thinking about something.
Interesting. I've been asked to go into politics on a few different levels, quite a few times, and I've said no each time. I'm not that silly, but it's not that. It's not just it's part of that invasion into who you are that I wouldn't consider. That's one of the main reasons I wouldn't consider it. I'd like to make a difference by doing so and stepping into those roles, and in the past, not now, but it was that invasion into who you are, and people doing exactly that, trying, not that there's any skeletons there, but it's that it's people that finding fault. And if you sit in politics, you either sit one side or the other, and then everyone else is going to criticize. And it's an interesting concept, isn't it? And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be extremely valuable in top leadership roles, but for that reason, step out.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, what came to mind when you were talking about politics, I'm not surprised at all to hear, Janine, that you've been approached. If you think about the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, and I bring her up because she chose to be in public life and to be be of service in the community at the highest possible level. And she has a certain set of values, as we all do, and I think it's really important, particularly for women in leadership, to be very clear about our values and what we stand for. And one of the things that Gladys Berejiklian stood for was integrity. And that is why she was so severely criticized, because how can you live up to integrity and go, I've done nothing wrong, when your boyfriend is sacked, however you choose to continue a relationship with him, and you can't see what's wrong about that. And so it pulls integrity, that highest value that she, and everybody, it was like the word that everybody said, integrity, integrity about the New South Wales Premier. And that was called into question. And that will always be there. That's a skeleton that will never go away for her. Ever.
No. And you are correct. It's that, particularly for her, is what we stand for. And our values are very important part of who we are as leaders and as women, but women in leadership in particular, carrying those values through and demonstrating those values. I think that builds up that authenticity and that people then can relate to and understand. And with the New South Wales Premier, it's very understandable as to how that flipped, but she survived it.
Yes, remarkably, she did survive it. And I think it's because, as we talk about in crisis management, Janine, is that, what sort of dollars are in the trust bank? What goodwill can you draw on? Because in a crisis, its values are on display big time. And if there's no, dollars in the proverbial trust bank, you're going to be broke and feeling very empty and quite frankly in a very scary place so it's about the goodwill, and that's the reason that she survived, is because there was a lot of inherent goodwill and a lot of support for her leadership, because she had been pragmatic and up until that stage when she made a very big mistake on a personal level. But and as we're talking about, you can't divorce those today.
No,
there's nothing at all that you can separate. When people say, "Oh, but that's private," well, I'm sorry today, particularly if you're a public figure, there's no such thing as privacy. Really, seriously,
no.
Is it?
Oh, no. And I've just thought about an episode when you're talking about that trust bank. My son's going through a separation and it's really quite nasty. And so on one of my social media posts and on some of my clients' social media posts, this particular woman and her friends have posted really horrible stuff and have also sent videos to some of my clients. The feedback I got was, we're not going to look at the videos. Of course, we don't believe anything that she's saying, Janine, and it's just she's making herself look stupid, and it's because of that trust bank.
Yeah, absolutely perfect example of the trust bank, and that's what I'm saying. A crisis can be, a personal level like that. I mean, that's a crisis in your family, and there's there's one side saying this, but it's that goodwill, that trust bank is obviously very full.
Yeah, it was. I was, super heartened by all the responses I got, and again, because the people just went, no, we know you. That's not who you aren't who she's saying you are. So it was good. This time, I know just recently we've had the inauguration of the new US president, and I think the exciting part is the vice president is a female for the first time, and talk about taking on one of the top leadership roles in the world.
Yes. Isn't it? I think it's absolutely fabulous that we have a female vice president and a woman of colour. It is exceptional. And to think there's a first gentleman in the White House is also quite exciting. So it was really interesting. And I was watching a little bit of the coverage at the time. And it's always at these heightened high stakes times that we notice symbols, if you like, the artifacts. And there was a lot of symbolism on display that particular day, and one of them was in the choice of color that Kamala wore and Jill Biden wore, and indeed Lady Gaga wore. And it was more symbolic of unity, if you like, not red and blue that divides, but the reds and the blues coming together. For example, Lady Gaga, extravagantly, beautifully dressed in couture, and she had this stunning deep navy jacket, and she had a symbol of a dove, you know, the peace dove, and she had this voluminous red skirt. So she was incredibly patriotic because she was singing the American national anthem. Kamala Harris was in purple. And that's, of course, the colour
So the
of...
red and blue together.
Yes, and indeed. And so, and it's also a colour that's associated with being very feminine, but it's also a colour that is of unity. So, and Jill Biden was wearing a beautiful sort of soft green. So it's incredibly interesting choices. And when you think about in a crisis, it's the symbols, particularly in a highly visual age like we live in, it's the symbols and the artefacts that will be remembered. And we go back to the dreadful riots, the early January, the insurrection in the Capitol in America. And there was a symbol that the symbol I remember is the Viking, the bare-chested, you know, Viking. And that symbolism and all the symbols and what they wear. And these might sound like unsubstantial, but this is actually what you pay major attention to. And this is when we're talking about the little things that bring you unstuck. It could be, it's like Coon cheese changing its name. You know, it's little but big, very, very big things that make a difference in a crisis.
Yes, and they can be quite subliminal. I mean, you've obviously noticed the color of the clothing because that's part of what you do, and as a PR consultant. But others wouldn't have. But it would be that subliminal message of the combination of the left and right, and the red and the blue, and still being one America. And it's very clever on their behalf, and very clever of Lady Gaga to bring in the dove as that symbol of peace.
Yes, all of that, because this is the non-verbal communication, which of course is 95% depending on which statistics you want to look at, but the vast overwhelming communication is non-verbal, and we forget that. So it means that, you know, when you talk about words, and in a crisis, words really, really matter, and symbols really, really matter, and tone of voice really, really matter. But the words are powerful, and let's choose them deliberately, strategically, because then we know that everything is sort of like seamless. And if there's anything that our minds can't get our head around is when they're out of sync. So it means, so for example, Joe Biden, not surprisingly, now President Biden, talked a lot about unity. That was what his theme of his campaign was. And they were the themes that were brought into everything around that day. It was very deliberate and very strategic. And that's my advice to leaders, is to think carefully about the little things and the symbols and the non-verbal singles that you're sending out when you are communicating, particularly in a crisis, because it's very powerful.
It is, and I've spoken to people that do specific branding, but this is branding on a whole different level. But it's branding and I know we're going to get more into that details of, but branding through communication, whether it's visual or whether it's auditory, whatever it is, how it makes you feel, kinesthetic as well. But it's that branding, not what people automatically think of as maybe a logo or, you know, Coca-Cola or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's deliberate. It needs to be very deliberate. I mean, I was speaking with a colleague recently, late last year, and we were talking about the impact of the change of the logo on the workforce, because it had gone and there was a change of name and a change of ownership, and not surprising, they want to stamp their leadership and the new way of being, and so the logo got changed. But for me and for my colleague, there was very little, insufficient, because I came in after the fact, which was sometimes, that's what happens, and they pay a lot of money for their mistakes. But that aside, and I'll come to a little rule a little bit later, but it was the fact that it was, it had gone drab and dark and brown, and previously it had been green and vibrant, and they were proud, but everybody sort of felt down and trodden upon for this new brown logo. So the impact that, and it's not a crisis, but it actually stirred up a lot of unintended emotions in the workforce, simply by not thinking through and properly consulting about the change of the color in the logo.
Wow, that's such what you would think such a simple thing, but it does. It's how we feel about things. I mean, that's what we make most of our buying decisions on, is not the rationalization. It's how we feel about it, and we can rationalize it if we.
Absolutely, exactly. I remember buying a house because it had a gorgeous blue bedroom with a stunning view. Emotional, right?
Yeah.
And then I went, oh well, let's look at the logic here. It's got two street entrances, and it's got a second bathroom. It's got great rooms for the kids, etc., etc. But that's the way we human beings are. And I think the other thing to remember here, when we've been talking about the little things that bring people undone, but I think it's also incredibly important to remind ourselves as female leaders the ability of storytelling. We've been telling stories this morning, and what we are, literally human beings are simply storytelling animals. And it is the stories that shape our beliefs. It's the stories, and the repetition of those stories can have good consequences and bad and unintended consequences as well.
Very, very much so. I'm putting together a retreat, which it will be in March in 2021, and which we're around this time, I think, where we go live with this particular podcast. But that's what I do, is I help people find their story and the story they've been telling themselves and how they can change that story. So that's another level down. But what I find with women leaders particularly is they've been telling themselves a story, and it's one of the reasons that women, when they apply for jobs, have to be able to do 80% of the listed tasks before they'll apply, whereas men will only have to do 20% and then bluff their way through the rest of it. But it's that story that, and it just doesn't go back one generation or two or three. It's something, I think, that's ingrained in our belief systems, that's changing now, but it's still got a long way to go. And even though a lot of people say, oh, the pendulum swung too far towards women's rights, it's not just the rights, it's women believing that they have those rights as much as they're entitled to them, which is a different thing. They believe they have them.
Absolutely. I actually think that it's a really good thing that I don't think the pendulum has swung too far at all.
No.
Absolutely not. And let's face it, we've been living mostly in patriarchal rule for a very, very long time, and there are very different leadership styles between men and women. And I think we've seen definitely, and let's take on the story of Jacinda Ardern, who's been courageous and very authentic and transparent in her leadership. I mean, she is lauded throughout the world, storied, if you like, throughout the world as an example of a fantastic female leader, and how she led New Zealand. Yes, it's a small country. Yes, there's only one government, but still, you could have mucked it up. But she had led the world, and through coronavirus, extraordinarily well, through her empathy and more, if you like, traditional female leadership. But it is, so we can choose to take on a different story. But and for women leaders, we have choice to make, because if we learn the different storytelling elements, then we can actually be more powerful and be more influential.
Yes. Yes, and then talking about that storytelling element is one of the things I teach people to do, is to list stories.
Yes.
Keep a record of stories.
Yes.
As a speaker, there's always something that'll pop up as an anecdote that you'll be able to refer to, and it then engages people a lot more than telling them a fact, and people remember those stories as opposed to giving them a direction or giving them a fact. It's such a powerful way to engage.
Oh, totally powerful way to engage with storytelling is. And when I'm working and doing leadership communication programs with my clients too, Janine, I always get them to tell me what are the top 10 things that have happened in your life. The top 10 most important things that have happened in your life. And of course they all evolve and change, and then why were they so important? Why do you bring that story? Like for one of my female young emerging leaders, I love working with young emerging female leaders, and she said, it was when I got my PhD. And I said, why was that so important to you? And she said, well, I had to basically do it by myself, because the professors would just make me stand up in class, and they'd leave, and I'd have to, run a seminar or a symposium. And she said, I learned that I could be in the moment. I learned that I could actually hold my own and be a leader in that moment. And she said, so I started to realize that I actually could be influential when I did my PhD, because I was left to do it by myself and lead symposiums.
And it's that leap of faith and trusting self then when you have to do that. And it was very clever of the professors, either lazy or clever or both, but that's...
Indeed. And she wasn't the only female doing her PhD, but all her supervisors were men.
I remember it was a leadership summit that was being held in Brisbane, and I was asked to do a little breakout, and it was on work-life balance, which is a myth, as we know.
Yes.
But it's a balance is depending on where your focus and energy goes and what's important to you at that time, and it changes over time. But it causes a lot of grief for people, because they're thinking, well, everyone else that I see on social media is able to do everything and keep it nicely balanced. And particularly for women in leadership role, they do tend to usually take on the primary role in the household as well as that leadership role in the workplace. It's that there's a lot of pressure to multitask, and because we're still holding on to that belief that that's what we need to do, and we need to be seen as that, otherwise we'll be judged that we're not doing that well either. But what my point was, this particular group of women or either had all double degrees, masters, or they were doctorates, and my question to them up front was, what do you do for you? And it was crickets.
Yes. Dead silence. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I went on to a completely different tangent with them, because I'd been listening to them during the lunch break, and the sense of not feeling inadequate and feeling like an imposter. And so I took the training in another direction because of that, what I'd been hearing. It was this, they just, here am I, left school at grade 10, 15-year-old. I've done a lot of training since, but, it's and telling them how to do things, and without questioning myself at all. I knew I had more skill on that particular topic than they did.
Yes, and that's a sort of imposter syndrome that we like to take on. And just going back to the fabulous young female emerging leader I work with, and we were talking through her stories, because one of the things she was most concerned about, because she was being schooled and trained to become leader of this small but massively important international organization. She said, but I'm so young, Janie, I'm so young. And I said, so let's change that thinking around. She said, but are the men going to believe me? And I said, okay, let's talk about what you've learned in your PhD and what that you can build a bridge to them and share different knowledge, and you will be seen as a very important asset and ally to them. I mean, this is a young woman who works with meat men. Right? She works in processing plants. And you can imagine, and huge family-owned businesses and family-owned meat production plants, where the majority of people she's dealing with are men, and older men who might have looked at her as, dare I say, a piece of meat for themselves. So one of the things we were talking earlier about branding and visual image was one of the things that we talked about, not only building her stories that will give her authenticity and influence and power, but also how she was to dress. Because that overall impression, again, the symbols and the artifacts to, if you like, control and manage as much as we possibly could, or she possibly could, through the way she dressed, so that she wasn't going to be seen as a piece of meat. And honestly, sadly, Janine, as you and I would know, men still think about young women like that. Sadly, it's still that way. So we spent a lot of time not only in looking at her storytelling as a female leader, young female leader, but also matching that with the way that she dressed. So, she worked with a fabulous image consultant, an executive image consultant, and a lot of science behind first impressions, so that, and then she went, this is efficient. I can just go to my wardrobe and go, oh, that's a meat processing day, I'll wear the jeans, or I'm going to be presenting on a webinar to the UN about meat standards, I'll wear that jacket. So again, it's about the point I'm making here very strongly. It's about being very deliberate and very strategic. And so when you're choosing your stories and knowing that if the proverbial ever happens to me, and it will, how am I going to contextualize this dreadful situation with an appropriate, relevant story?
Yeah, that's important. It's that whole, it is, as we've been talking about, it's the whole picture. I know when I do my podcast, I love color, and when I do the podcast interviews, I wear this blouse. I just always wear it because I love color, and I'm not a blazer type of person, and it's my uniform.
Well, that's right, and that's what you'd be known for. It's part of your overall image. And it's important. It's again, so it's about how you build your trust, because if you were suddenly to appear in black, people would go, what's going, we would notice. And again, you think of the symbols of Winx, another story I haven't quite like. I mean, there's a dreadful side of horse racing, but I grew up with beautiful horses and being cared for in a beautiful way, and had a very good experience with horse racing. And Winx's owner, Debbie, she wore exactly the same suit every single time Winx raced. And if she ever wore another one, we'd be going, what's happened with Debbie? What's going on with Winx? And again, it's the repetition in what we do, and being very deliberate about choices we make. And women, incredibly important for us, again, if we come to being deliberate and strategic in everything that we do, is to go, well, what do I stand for? What are my values? What are the 3 words that are associated with me? And how am I going to communicate that in everything that I do?
Yeah. And that's a good thing, is it? What are the 3 words that are associated with me?
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It'll be an interesting little exercise for people to do.
It is. It's an extremely interesting exercise to do. Ask other people what are the 3 adjectives that are associated with you, and then you'll find there's a pattern.
I was going to say, what you would say and what somebody else would say are completely different.
when it's, you'll be surprised. I've done this exercise with clients. I've done it for myself. I never get my clients to do anything I haven't done, in that sense. And I did it very recently for when I was changing my logo and doing my branding a bit differently. And there was a word that I wanted, if you like, associated with me, came through loud and clear. So so there was consistency and congruency.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say completely different. Then that's not right. But they would be how sometimes people perceive you is very different than how you perceive yourself.
Yes, it's important in our digital world of that consistency, so that when people meet you, they go, "You're just like I expected you to be."
Yeah. And exactly right. You don't want to be putting on something that you're not. I remember, and as you were saying about that, the woman that you're working with, when I was GM for a company, I would be presenting tenders to one level of either government or top level within mining, and or I'd be walking through a construction site.
Yes.
So we've got different ways of dressing, obviously, but you've also got different ways of communicating, but it's still got to be authentically you.
Oh, totally. Absolutely authentically you. I mean, and we can pick that up a mile away today, because there's so much information, and it's information, it's not communication. It's information that is absolutely, we drown in it, and think about who stands out, who pops out when you are getting, yet another video of somebody wanting us to buy yet something else, or the various leaders who step up and out and doing media interviews, or being Facebook Live, or whatever the various mediums are out there. It is always the authentic self that has to come through. And it depends on the moment as to how your tone of your voice might be. And again, that can be very deliberate. When the stakes are high, 93%, if not 95%, when the stakes are high and the spotlight's on you in a crisis, in a high stakes situation, 95% of communication is nonverbal. So it takes a great deal of thought, or should, and being very deliberate and strategic about what you say, the tone of your voice, and what you're wearing.
Yes, and who you're associated with as well.
Oh, absolutely. Like, who's going, exactly. You're absolutely right. What's the overall impression you want to create? Who's going to stand on that proverbial podium beside you, or behind you and flank you when you go out there and front the media at one of those all-in presses, as we call them, when the stakes are high and the media are braying for, well, who is responsible and why did this happen?
Absolutely. Hey, well, why do women make better leaders in a crisis? Or do they? Is that a question?
Well, it's a very good question. And the most recent research that's been done around the world shows that women are actually coping, no, that's the wrong word. Women are leading better in a crisis.
Okay.
And you think of, well, we've talked about Jacinda Ardern, who's probably, well, she's certainly my number one pin-up girl when it comes to world leaders. But then, so she came through a younger woman. She made she appeared on Facebook, sometime, and she just fed her child, and she came in her almost her jammies. But she had a brand of being very empathetic, very caring, very warm. And she was consistent through that. Yet she had Churchillian type moments when she was, very assertive and very assertive. So she combined her male and female qualities extremely well. But overall, the empathetic, caring, collaborative nature of traditional female leadership shone through. Angela Merkel, on the other hand, the mother of Germany, as sort of, and she's a very different woman, an older woman, and she is a scientist. And so her approach was to be empathetic in a sense by providing good, simple science. So she led through science and
Yeah.
led the way. Taiwan, again, another female leader. And I haven't studied her enough, Janine, to actually know. I've certainly studied Angela Merkel, and I've certainly studied Jacinda in great deal. So it is overall making the points that are being made now that in our new world that we're in, the new world that we're in is going to take a great deal of courage. It's going to take a great deal of collaboration, a great deal of compassion. And naturally, women, particularly the younger female emerging leaders, are doing that exceptionally well. It's not to say there aren't good, kind men out there, and the men who are embracing a more collaborative, cooperative way of being are going to succeed. So the good men and the good women, bringing their good female and male qualities together, we will change the world. But it will take commitment and courage and collaboration, and women do that better, and that's what the studies show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. One of the topics that I train people on in the sales is in spiral dynamics, and I don't know whether you've ever come across that.
No, fascinating. I'd love to know more.
It is fascinating, and as communities change, as the world changes, as we as individuals change, instead of reaching a pinnacle in our evolution, as Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs, this questions this spiral that we're continually changing, and the shifts between each of the levels of the spiral have taken sometimes eons to move through, but moving through a lot more quickly. And it's now from the level that most of the world has been sitting in, most of the Western world definitely, and a lot of it, emerging world, is gone into a level where it's about me, and it's about science development, and it's about money, and it's focuses on, and this is where we find most of the scientific developments, medical developments, but it also is very much about corporations and what's in it for me. The next level is more of that collaborative type of space, and the color they assign to it is green. And I think COVID has pushed us through to that much quicker in societies than we would have done naturally. A lot of the West has been sitting between the orange and the green for a while, but I think that with the COVID, it's pushed people through that more and looking more at we realize that we're not in this alone. It's still, not everyone changes, but we're not in this alone, and it is something that we need to, whether our community is just our suburb or whether it's the world, it's changing that thinking about how we can address this as a community and not just an individual.
It sounds fascinating work, the spiraling. I really love the
spiral dynamics.
Spiral dynamics. I love the sound of it. I love the pictures that it puts in my mind, as opposed to the sort of rigid triangle. I think it shows flexibility. And the point you're making about COVID, I will completely agree with you. Other colleagues of mine, there are differing opinions. Some think that COVID has actually reduced our appetite for risk. I disagree entirely. I think what COVID has shown us is that we can adapt very quickly if we need to. If we think about working from home and our telehealth and other government initiatives that were changed, and in some cases organisations literally in 24 hours or 48 hours, they switched everything to home working. And so as they say in our world, never waste a good crisis.
I love that. I think that's very relevant. I think we could have another whole conversation on that. Just on the spiral dynamics, when you're doing research, Nelson Mandela used that when he came into power to bring all the different components of the country together, and because each one needed a different conversation.
Well, let's hope that the new president of the United States is also into spiral dynamics, because he will certainly need His theme is unity, and his inaugural address brought that through, and every symbol of the day was about unity. And talk about the uncivil war that has happened in America, as he just aptly described it. It will take a great deal of collaboration, and I think there's a very female leadership style about the new president. And I think it's come through his personal, as many of the commentators were saying around the inauguration, because of his personal tragedies, he brings deep personal experience and character, deep character into being president. If you like, he'll be the grandfather. And he is, but he was likened to FDR and the Fireside Chats, being a grandfather and bringing together all those various parts. And I hold, and with a strong female leader beside him, I do have optimism that there is a way forward, but it's going to take a lot of and a lot of community building and a lot of consensus and collaboration and cooperation like we've never seen in the United States in the last couple of decades.
No, that'll be very important. 3 takeaway points. So we could talk all day, Janie.
Yeah, we could talk all day. Okay, so 3 takeaway points. When you consider your communication as a female leader, be very deliberate, very strategic about all your communication, what you're wearing, what you're saying, and being true to your brand. That's absolutely key. So the authenticity comes through. When it comes to planning for a crisis, just do it. Pull together a little team of people, have a bit of fun, do some brainstorming, thinking of the most bizarre, of the worst things that could possibly ever happen in your organization. Let me tell you, the mere fact you can think about them, they will. And then just start to put a little plan together of who your key stakeholders are. And the third one is, if you want to be a powerful communicator, I've got a little powerful communicators blueprint, and I'd love to share it with you, and you can do a bit of a self-assessment as to how powerful communicator you are or not. And if you're not, I'd love to help you get there.
Yeah, excellent. Now that sounds terrific. So how can people get in touch with you?
Yes, so, well, the usual ways. I've got a website, which is janejordan.com.au. Jane Jordan Consulting is on Facebook, and you find me on LinkedIn. Jane Jordan Reputational Risks are the best ways to get in touch.
I've been calling you Janie because your name's spelled N-I-E.
I am.
Yeah.
I know, I am Janie Jordan. But formally, I've ended up being Jane Jordan Consulting. It's just one of those things. But Janie, I am, and that's who I am, and I'm proudly Janie Jordan. You'll find me wherever the socials are.
And all of the links will be on the podcast notes anyway, and everywhere that you'll find the information, you will be able to find Janie's contact details and have a further conversation. If you're a female leader in a role and there's that planning for the crisis, you can understand after listening to this conversation with Janie just how important that is to be able to be prepared for that.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So thank you very much for your expertise and your time today. I've really enjoyed it. Time goes very quickly, as it usually does once we get into a conversation.
Thank you, Jenny. I've loved having this conversation with you, and let's go hope that our new Vice President in the United States, because it's a powerful country, let's wish her well in her role as a very significant, probably the top female leadership role in the world.
Oh, I'd have to disagree with that. I think the Queen might be.
Oh, the Queen. Queen. Okay. Well, the Queen. All right.
Well, yes. when I run, it's interesting. When I run my professional speaking classes, I get people to identify who the top speakers are that they come across and why and what they have. And it's interesting. Nobody thinks of the Queen until I bring it up, and they go, "Oh my gosh, yes, she has that." She has a brand, doesn't she?
She has a brand. She does indeed. And some of her speeches are really worth listening to and studying because they are very purposeful, very strategic, and very pointed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had to bring that one in. It's always a favorite of mine. Thank you very much. That's
Pleasure.
Janie Jordan. And that's another episode of the We Are Women podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review. I'd love to have and communicate. Drop a note and say that what you enjoyed particularly about it, and give us some feedback on it. If you are stuck in business a little bit and you're not sure how that you want to grow your business, I provide a free 20-minute consultation, a bit of a strategy call, and I can direct you to a lot of the experts that I've dealt with if I can't help you myself. So please do that. Jump on the website, janinevosper.com. Again, I would look forward to having that conversation with you. Next time, I don't know what's up next time. We'll have to wait and see, as you will. That's another episode of the We Are Women podcast. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.
So, do you feel stuck in a rut in business? Visit speechperfect.com.au and download Janine's free ebook to avoid the 5 most common stumbling blocks women face in business. It's jam-packed full of tips to overcome the barriers that could be holding you back from the success that you dream your business will be. We would love you to leave a review of today's episode and share this podcast with other women in need of entrepreneurial inspiration. Subscribe to the next episode now and join the We Are Women community.